Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this hearing to order. Tonight, the Small and Minority Business Committee will discuss the city's construction prequalification code and ways to improve the code for diverse contractors, our workers, and the city of Columbus. This is one of several steps to ensure the city of Columbus is doing all it can to work with a more diverse set of companies. This is one piece of a larger commitment to support minority and female-owned local businesses. I want to thank Director Demita Brown, Ms. Rita McNeil-Danish, Mr. Sean Fouts, and Bianca Bell for being here with us this evening. I also like to thank Karina Johnson from our Legislative Research Office, as well as Zach Davidson on my staff. On tonight's agenda, first we'll hear an overview of the pre-qualifications from the Department of Finance. Then Director Brown and Ms. Rita will provide some remarks about what the Disparity Study said regarding construction pre-qualification, as well as what other peer cities are doing on this issue. Finally, Zach Davidson will walk us through some slides about the data related to pre-qualifications and potential strategies to improve the policy. After each presentation, council members will have the opportunity to ask questions. Then we'll hear from members of the public, and then I'll conclude with closing remarks and adjourn this hearing. As for background about this hearing, Mason Tillman conducted the city's 2019 Disparity Study. The Disparity Study found that significant disparities exist in the city of Columbus's utilization of businesses owned and operated by minority groups and women in comparison to their availability. Mason Tillman also gathered qualitative research indicating that minority, women, and non-minority business owners allege that both active and passive participation in discriminatory policies. The city does hundreds of millions of dollars in construction and contracting alone, and we need to ensure that it creates good jobs and it helps lift all of our families. With that, I'd like to turn the floor over to the finance team and Director Fouts. You can take it away.
Thank you. Angela, yeah, thank you. I'm sharing on screen. Thank you. Thank you very much, Council President. What I hope to do in this session is just answer some background questions about the construction pre-qualification program that is housed within the Finance and Management Department Office of Purchasing Office. The questions I hope to answer in this are: what is pre-qualification? Why was pre-qualification established? What are the requirements to be pre-qualified? Give some other relevant background and answer questions from council members. With me today is Bianca Bell, the management analyst too within our office, who is assigned to staff the pre-qualification program, and she'll be able to answer any questions also. What is pre-qualification? Construction pre-qualification is an annual uniform process for evaluating any potential construction bidders or subcontractors. Pre-qualification of potential construction bidders and subcontractors is a separate process from the bid evaluation procedure. Again, this is something that happens annually for anyone who might want to bid on construction as a subcontractor or a general contractor. It does not happen at each bid. Pursuant to Section 329.21G of the Columbus City Code, which is part of the procurement section of the code, only bidders who are pre-qualified responsible or provisionally responsible may be awarded a contract for city construction work. That also applies to licensed construction trade subcontractors. You must be pre-qualified responsible or provisionally responsible in order to subcontract or perform any construction work. No business entity pre-qualified not responsible may receive or perform any city construction work. So in other words, if you're not pre-qualified responsible or provisionally responsible, you can't even submit a bid that will be reviewed by the city for construction work. Why was pre-qualification established? In 2013, pre-qualification was established, and the main word is for consistency. Responsibility of construction bidders and subcontractors was being determined on a bid-by-bid basis. That duplicated effort, and it also had the potential for inconsistent application. So by having a construction pre-qualification being uniform, we reduce the amount of work that's required to evaluate a bidder every single time, and we also make sure we're being consistent throughout the city. To reiterate who needs to be pre-qualified, any potential bidders on construction contracts, so otherwise known as primes or general contractors, must be pre-qualified responsible. Also, any licensed construction trade subcontractor must be pre-qualified responsible. That includes HVAC, refrigeration, electrical, plumbing, hydronic, fire protection, firefighting equipment. Again, pre-qualification is for construction work only. So many of these vendors that are pre-qualified responsible or do apply to be pre-qualified, they might do maintenance work or minor renovations. They don't need to be pre-qualified responsible to do that work. It's only for those things that are truly construction bids as defined in the code. How do you become pre-qualified responsible? There are various criteria, some of which you have to meet, and some of which are optional. You have to accrue a certain number of points. The code breaks these into different categories. The first we call Category A, which has 6 requirements. In Category A, you must meet all 6 criteria. There are no exceptions. You can't fail on any of these. To meet these criteria, you must be able to answer the criteria true or have an exemption, which I'll go into. There is one exemption, and submit the correct documentation for each criteria. If you fail to provide the correct documentation or you answer any of these criteria false, you will not be deemed responsible. You are automatically pre-qualified, not responsible. You won't go into the next category. These requirements in this Category A, again, requirements that must be met, all 6, by everyone who wants to be a general, are workers' compensation, unemployment compensation, bonding. This is the ability to be bonded. This is the exemption for subcontractors. So if you only want to be a subcontractor and you don't plan on bidding as a general or prime, you can fill out in the form of the exemption. I only want to be a subcontractor. You have to agree to make financial statements available to the city upon request. You have to certify that you're not currently debarred by any other public agency, and you have to be current and compliant on city taxes. If you meet all of those requirements or have the exemption for bonding because you're only a subcontractor, you move to Category B. In Category B, there are 5 criteria. You must meet any 3 of the 5 in order to be deemed pre-qualified responsible. To meet these criteria, again, you must be able to answer the criteria as true and submit correct documentation. Failure to provide a true answer on 3 of the 5 or correct documentation will result in no points awarded, and you won't be pre-qualified responsible. These five criteria within Category B are local workforce, at least 15% full-time equivalents must work from Columbus. You have a quality training contractor program. You offer health insurance to your employees. You offer a retirement pension program, or you're a local business. Again, you don't have to meet all 5 of these, but you do have to meet 3 of the 5 in order to move on to Category C. If you've met all of Category A and 3 of the 5 in Category B, you will move on to Category C. The applicant receives 10 points for each factor they have in Category B. So if you only had 3, you move forward with 30 points. If you had all 5, you would move forward with 50 points. There are various points for different factors in Category C. I didn't list them all in this presentation. The conclusion is you need 131 points total to be deemed pre-qualified provisionally responsible, or 151 points total to be deemed pre-qualified responsible. In the code, if you're deemed pre-qualified provisionally responsible, you have 12 months to receive the other 20 points, but you can start to bid. I haven't listed all of the criteria in Category C. Some of the more important, some of those that are important are no debarments within the last 5 years, no litigation with the city within the last 5 years, no record of unsatisfactory judgments arising from non-discrimination laws, or no assessed penalties by OSHA. Again, in Category C, you don't have to meet every one. You just are accumulating enough points to be provisionally responsible or responsible. Some background information on how the program is working. In 2020, the office received 208 applications. Of those, 187 were deemed responsible, 9 were deemed provisionally responsible, and 12 were deemed not responsible. Of those 20 in the last two categories, 10 of them did ultimately become responsible by either providing more information or better documentation or changing something in their application. There are currently 189 vendors deemed responsible. Typically, the non-responsible vendors fail in category B in the criteria 7, 9, 10, and 11. And as a reminder, those criteria are local workforce, quality training program, retirement or pension, and local business. Typically, when we have these vendors, the 20 who are either provisionally, or excuse me, the 12 who are not responsible, this is typically where they fail. Of those 189 vendors deemed responsible, 5 are women business enterprises and 3 are minority business enterprises. So that's the background of how the construction pre-qualification program started, how one becomes pre-qualified, and where we are today with how many pre-qualified vendors we have.
Thank you, Mr. Fowles, for that presentation. Can I just start quickly with that last stat that you said around the 2 women-owned businesses and 3 minority businesses that are pre-qualified?
There are 5 women business enterprises and 3 minority business enterprises.
Before we started this process, have we had any outreach from the minority contracting community regarding the pre-qualification process for the city?
Before pre-qualification became a program in 2013?
Post, in the intermediate time since we started pre-qualification, has there been outreach to your office regarding potential issues with why we have 8 out of the 189 vendors deemed responsible?
Yes. There has been informal communication at our vendor outreach events that we hold with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. There throughout this time period with various minority and female business enterprises. Again, typically the vendors fail in these 4 categories. And that holds for all vendors, whether they're minority business enterprises, women business enterprises or not.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open up for any questions regarding kind of how we got here and background to my colleagues. I can't see my colleague. Now I can. Now I can see my colleagues. Councilmember Dorns or Councilmember Favor, do you have any questions for Director Cox?
I'll let Councilmember Favor go first if she has any.
I actually think my questions will be answered once I hear from we hear Director Brown's presentation.
Okay.
Sweet.
Great. So, Mr. Faust, just one sort of clarifying point, so it's not so much a question, but just sort of make it a little bit clearer, because the contracting process in construction can be a little bit confusing. So, clearly the pre-qualification standard, as you've just laid it out, applies to prime contractors, so those folks who are in direct contract with the city of Columbus. That's correct, right?
Correct.
And then any license. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right, and any licensed trade subcontractors.
Right. So when we say licensed trades, we're talking about, as you mentioned, the different types of industries. So when we're talking about that license, that's a license that's issued by the Ohio Construction Industry Licensing Board, correct?
Correct.
And then this sort of getting to my final point here. So when we think about like who pre-qualification sort of applies to on a construction project. So, we have the folks that are in direct contract with the city. We have folks that hold a license from the state of Ohio to perform their trade. And then we have a number of contractors that will be active on that project likely that do not require to be pre-qualified because they're not in direct contract, because they're a subcontractor and they don't hold a license. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So for example, like an insulator contractor or a roofing contractor or a cement contractor, those folks would be active on a city project, but not would be required to go through a pre-qualification with the city in order to work on that project.
Right. Anything that is not a licensed trade, correct?
Right. I don't know if this is even answerable here, but I'm just thinking about. So we were at the Linden Rec Center today, and I'm just thinking, of that project, how many of the contractors on that project needed to be pre-qualified in order to work. I know that's probably an unfair question to ask you, sort of on the spot, but I don't know if you can give us sort of a ballpark figure.
I wouldn't know. I don't know the particulars of that project. Bianca might be able to weigh in on a typical project, how many, but like you said, council member, there are many companies and people working on a job that are not a licensed trade. I mean, that comes from the gamut. Think of if there's landscaping that has to be done on a project, or any laboring or anything like that. It's just not a licensed trade. There are many things that go into construction work, whether it's above ground or below ground, that are not licensed trades. I wouldn't know the total number of spend. That's something we could probably research, give a better guesstimate or estimate of that. And Bianca may know. She's on the call. She may not know.
And what I guess sort of moving to that, and again, I appreciate that sort of context. Would it be so? Obviously, the prime contracts, so in direct contracts with the city, the licensed subcontracts, those are going to be pretty sizable contracts, correct? And from a dollar standpoint, right?
Right. Yeah.
Would it also be fair to say those other contractors, subcontractors that are not required to be pre-qualified? Again, those also make up a fairly significant sort of spend of the project. Not as much as the other ones, most likely because of the specialty nature, but they're not 5% of the project. They're a decent chunk of the spend. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yes, I'd say it's very fair to say on most projects. And depending on the type of project, that would be more or less.
Sure. Yeah. Again, the difference of a rec center that has lots of different contractors on it versus if we're doing a sidewalk and there's only one or two contractors that are working on it, right? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fouts. I appreciate it. I just want to talk a little bit more about the context of like who's subject to this and who isn't. But appreciate it.
Thank you, council members. Next, we'll hear from Director Demita Brown and Ms. Rita McDaniel. Rita McNeil Danish. I apologize.
Thank you, Council President Hardin and members of council. So as the president has already alluded to, our portion of the presentation is just to talk through a bit about the findings of the Disparity Study and share with you some of our findings related to a peer review that was conducted by Ms. Rita McNeil Danish of JD Squared Strategists. I will spend my time focused on the report. I'll turn the peer review over to Rita. During last week's hearing, we introduced the Increased Diversity Program, which is our office's response to the disparities found in the 2019 Disparity Study. The Increased Diversity Program, as you've already heard, is a series of program and initiatives that are geared toward alleviating those disparities in city contracting by educating, engaging, and emphasizing or increasing our utilization of minority and women-owned companies. We recognize as we go through this work that diversity and inclusion is really about creating economic inclusion and ensuring that all size businesses are able to enjoy and participate in the economic prosperity of our city. To that end, the Increased Diversity Program not only looks at our minority businesses, but also looks at our small business community as well to continue to spur that growth and development of our city and our small business community. In short, the 2019 Disparity Report identifies the current pre-qualification requirement process as a real barrier to the inclusion of small minority and women business enterprises in our city contracting. From the report, we know that minorities and women were largely sorry, I have a habit of hitting that mute button. We know that our minority and women businesses are underrepresented in our contracting. Apologies. A brief recap of the data that we shared last week. Of our construction contracts, we know that 96% of all contracts valued over $100,000 are in large part given to prime contractors who are non-minority. we see a similar pattern in our subcontracting as well, where we see just over 10% of those dollars are being shared with minority and women-owned businesses. The Disparity Study also did an anecdotal analysis of minority as well as non-minority contractors in their experiences in doing work with the City of Columbus. And there were key concerns that were brought out through the report that I just wanted to highlight, just a few. Overall, overwhelmingly, all businesses identified the pre-qualification process as arduous, excessive, and very hard to meet. And so we need to do some sort of work around simplifying that process. There were some concerns relative to the education and awareness around the pre-qualification process to ensure that people not only understand the requirements that are put forth in the pre-qualification, but they have the assistance that's needed to get them through it. The process by many are determined to have an unintended consequence of limiting competition by potentially favoring large businesses over smaller firms. And as I stated earlier, in its current form, many have identified the process as being excessive and expensive to maintain. In particular to minority contractors, there was real concern about their ability to build capacity in our city contracting programs in order to move from the subcontractors today to our prime contractors of tomorrow. That is a real concern for us in the Disparity Study as we are looking to really build out a city that is sensitive to embracing and encouraging of the growth of small and minority businesses. Over the past year in our work in reviewing the Disparity Study recommendations to offer proposals to council related to the pre-qualification process, we had the opportunity to begin to look at other cities to try to stack up where we are as it relates to other cities in our processes to potentially offer some recommendations for how the City of Columbus can simplify our process and really begin to create a process that is much more inclusive. I will stop my comments there and turn it over to Rita, who can share a little bit more about that peer review study.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Council President and members of Council. It is a pleasure to have opportunity to share this information with you. As the Director shared with you, as part of this process, we did a peer review assessment. It is by no means an exhaustive study of every city in these United States, but it was an attempt to identify those cities that are similar to the City of Columbus, or otherwise there could be some alignment that would make sense to take a look at them. So obviously we took a look at the cities in Ohio, the three cities, Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland. But we also took a look at ODOT simply because ODOT sits right here in Columbus. And so it would be unfair to not look at ODOT, although obviously it is a separate federal entity. We also took a look at Indianapolis, Charlotte, North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina, Louisville, Kentucky. And then while Seattle and King County, Washington are not necessarily what we would call peer cities, we took a look at them because they tend to lead the packs oftentimes in what they do in the MBE, WBE space, as well as with regard to construction and projects. Simply said, as a result of this review, it was interesting to note some cities did not have a program at all that required pre-qualification to the extent that the City of Columbus requires. They did not require it of their primes and they did not require it of their subs. There are some cities, only 2 out of the peer cities, who have a program where they require it of their primes but do not require it of their subs. A lot of cities who did have some semblance of a program would require pre-qualification over a dollar amount. So typically the dollar amount would be 500,000 or $1 million. Therefore, saying pre-qualification would be required for a prime if the amount of the project was over 500,000 or over $1 million. Even in those instances, the subs typically were not required to pre-qualify, except in, for example, Charlotte, on a project-by-project basis, they retained the ability to require a particular sub to pre-qualify. Also, Raleigh has a similar program that on a case-by-case, project-by-project basis, they would require that pre-qualification. And then some of the other cities just did not have it, but obviously would have some of the other requirements, obviously, that are good business entities. So for example, have you been debarred? Have you sued the city? They would maintain those kind of questions, but would not have it as part of an entire pre-qualification process. It's notable that cities like Indianapolis did not have a program. Louisville did not have a program. Seattle, Washington did not have a program. And when I say program, I don't mean the bonding requirements or the things I've identified with regard to workers' comp or whether or not you've been debarred or sued. But when I say program, I'm referring to the pre-qualification in order to do business on a particular construction project. So when you look at, you have to kind of look at it as a pendulum, at least that's the way I looked at it. I would say that majority of cities did not have a program that required the pre-qualification for primes and subs. There were a few that did, and in those particular instances, it was based upon a dollar amount that triggered the pre-qualification. And then obviously there's the other cities that had the other requirements and the other requests, but were not part of an exhaustive process that actually was spoken to earlier in explaining the City of Columbus process. So I reiterate, my focus was on cities, peer cities. I did not look at counties, and the only deviation would have been ODOT, and that was because it sits here, right here in Columbus. But I'm happy to answer any questions about a particular city because I'm trying to summarize it rather than overwhelm you with a lot of information.
Thank you, both Director and to Ms. Rita.
You can just go with Miss Rita. It's fine.
Okay. Thank you. Because I will mess it up each and every time, just because I know you as Miss Rita. Kind of starting from that last question, Ms. Rita, and kind of like on the inverse of that, for cities that do have pre-qualification as a regimen, as a process, and we have to remember the base value, like the reason we have pre-qualification, one, for consistency,
Right.
Want to make sure that our values are stated when we do business and with our dollars. But did you find a city that has pre-qualifications, light or strong or somewhere in that pendulum, that also has high minority participation?
So that's difficult because without delving into the particular details with each city, that information wasn't necessarily provided. I can say that I did have conversations in particular with Raleigh and Charlotte, North Carolina, and Indianapolis. And I can say in the case of Indianapolis, they don't have a program, so it was easy to exclude them. And the reason they don't have a program because they thought it was a barrier. And they most recently just did a disparity study and concluded that they didn't want to have something like that. And I point to that because they are obviously in between us and Michigan and Chicago. And so it was notable to them that Chicago has a program, but it's a dollar amount program. We have a program. And so I think they gave some thought to it as they did their disparity study. But there is Philadelphia has a program, and I wasn't able to ascertain the MBE kind of information. With regard to Raleigh and Charlotte, I did have conversations with both cities, and they did say that it was in fact an impediment. And they recognize it's an impediment, and they try to do things to overcome it. And that's why they decided to make it a project by project basis. So in other words, they use the same kind of analysis of a dollar amount. So obviously, if it is a big dollar project and they want to make sure that their risk is covered, then they were making a determination that they would kick in the pre-qualification requirements. And so what I like to talk about when I talk about pre-qualification is a relationship between the risk and the requirement for pre-qualification. So one can understand that the city needs to protect its risk. And so the higher the risk, the more likely the need to have more checks and balances in place. So places like Charlotte and Raleigh, that was their methodology. The higher the risk, the greater they were likely to kick in some pre-qualification requirements. The lower the risk, they weren't going to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. The only other thing that I would bring up in this portion was when we started this conversation, one of the impetus for me was conversations with minority construction companies, and they indicated that bonding was also a barrier for them. And I know it's not directly part of this code change, but could you just talk about any potential changes to bonding requirements envisioned as part of implementing the disparity study?
Sure, I'll take that, and Rita, if you want to chime in, feel free. Two things that we're looking at with the disparity study implementation. One, we've proposed a small contract bond waiver program where projects that are under $100,000 would not require a bond. Obviously, to Rita's point, certainly we have to evaluate the risk, but we feel like that dollar threshold is low enough where we feel that the risk can be managed appropriately. And I will add that figure, we arrived at that figure through our external and internal working group meetings, who determined that our initial proposal of $25,000 would not get us far enough in really aiding our small minority business community, and that when we look across the city's contracting, $100,000 seemed to be more appropriate for that types of small contracts bond waivers program. The second thing that we are proposing to do, which will take a bit of work, is to assess the effectiveness or the use of an owner-controlled insurance program, where the city is able to sort of bring on that risk and manage it in-house, as opposed to putting that burden on our contracting community. So those are two things from a disparity study perspective that we are looking at, as we know bonding continues to be a major barrier for many of our contractors.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Ms. Rita. Open it up to my colleagues.
Thank you, Director Brown and Ms. Rita, for your presentation. Ms. Rita, so wondering the cities where you found that there were no programs, and I believe that one of the reasons why we implemented a program in Columbus was for consistency's sake. So how are these cities able to be consistent in the way in which they're pre-qualifying potential contractors in their cities?
Well, I'll kind of use a different set of words if you don't mind, Council Member. So they maintain consistency by requiring certain things, like the performance bond and the surety bond, but the performance and surety bond is connected to the project necessarily rather than a broad application. They will make the request also for the workers' comp. They will ensure that you, again, where I said where you've not sued the city, where you've not been debarred, where you don't have performance issues. So you have to provide that information. So I would suggest that they provide that consistency by getting that information and clarifying that information, but they don't require, if you will, and I try to avoid legal speak, but they don't require the necessity of pre-qualification before you would bid on a project for both the prime and the sub. Instead, as you register with the city and as you prepare your bid, you must provide this information, or you must provide assurance of this information. So it's more directly correlated with a project, and especially if you're doing business constantly, obviously it's in the system, so you don't have to necessarily repeat it, but there's a correlation to the project and your engagement, and not necessarily something that you have to do up front before you can even apply, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, ma'am. So my concern is, as we're evaluating what the pre-qualification program should look like in Columbus, if it is geared more towards being project-based, are we still going to run into the very same issues for our MBE and WBE folks if we're still asking for the same items, qualifications? I'm not sure what the right language is there, but just not calling it pre-qualification anymore. If it's still attached to the project at the end of the day, and if the things that we are requiring have been identified as obstacles, barriers, how are we ensuring that that these individuals are not going to get caught up once again in the process of not getting the bid?
So I would suggest that it's a balancing act. So I would suggest that on behalf of the city, you have a duty to protect your interest and evaluate the risk. And if you've got a major multi-dollar, million-dollar project, you have to protect that and ensure that you have insured all performance issues and bonding issues, and you've done everything to protect the city. And at the same time, there's an obligation on that contractor that if he or she is engaged in a multi-million-dollar project, then they have to appreciate your need and they have to meet you where you are. So, however, if it is not that multi-million-dollar project and there's an opportunity for a minority or woman-owned business to get engaged and not have to jump over several hoops, then that becomes an opportunity. So it's a balancing act that says, again, I go back to the risk analysis. If the risk is low, then shouldn't we create opportunities? I often give this example when I talk in the MBE, WBE space. Imagine we're on 670, right? And your majority contractors are on the part of 670 that had been newly paved and doesn't have any holes, doesn't have any ridges. It's just a straight road. But imagine your MBE and WBE contractors are on the side with potholes and ridges in the road, and it's a little bit difficult to navigate. So what do? You create a ramp that makes it a little easier for them to reach the same destination that perhaps the majority contractor is reaching. And so when your risk is low, why not create that opportunity to open the tent and create more opportunities for everybody to engage and for that minority or woman-owned business to elevate themselves to a place where they can do all those things and then be able to bid on the multi-million-dollar project and be able to ensure the city's risk is protected. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am, it does. I just will, share my concern that we as the city have to continue to do our due diligence in preparing and equipping our WBE and MBE folks with the tools that they need in order to achieve those contract bids when they become available. Because to some degree, if we're not talking about the low risk categories. And if we want folks to be able to move into that next step, if they're not prepared, if they're not educated on that process, we're just kicking the can down the road for them, right? And they're not going to be successful regardless, even if we amend the pre-qualification statute. So I do absolutely appreciate those responses.
And absolutely, if they're not getting the exposure and the experience, they can't grow. It's a given.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Ms. Rita, good to see you again. Couple of questions for you, and I want to pull the thread a little bit more on what Councilmember Faber was just talking about. And again, this may require a little bit of follow-up afterwards, if that's okay. So certainly appreciate if the answers aren't readily available. So for the cities that don't have a pre-qualification standard in place, and I think I just want to have a sort of brief discussion to sort of make this a little bit clear about what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. So those that don't have the system where you need to be pre-qualified before you're allowed, don't have that in place, so it's sort of project-based. Are there still standards that they have in place? Did you lose me for a second?
Yes, but I'm catching up. Yeah, you were coming in and out.
Sorry about that. last virtual hearing, hopefully for a while. So those cities that do not have the pre-qualification standard in place, do they still have those project by project requirements? And if so, is there a threshold that's baked in there? Because I know one of the things we're going to talk about, sort of moving forward here in Columbus, is sort of where a threshold would make sense. And from I think everything you're talking about from a risk standpoint makes all the sense in the world of managing that risk. And I'm curious, if we're looking at other peer cities, if they're implementing a requirements on project by project basis, where are they sort of implementing those? Because those are, I think, to Councilmember Faber's point, very similar to a pre-qualification standard. It's just not on the front end. So they still have standards in place, but it's just organized a little bit differently. So I'm curious, those peer cities you mentioned that don't have this type of thing in place, do they have project by project standards? And then two, do they have sort of a threshold that's associated with those?
Okay. So what I would say is, as I shared, most of the cities do have some requirement with regard to workers' comp insurance, with regard to performance and surety bond, with regard to debarment, suing the city. They have requirements in those categories. And those seem to be typically across the board. If there is ever a threshold number that is used, I've seen two numbers, either 500,000 or $1 million. I've seldom seen under 500,000. In fact, obviously, as I shared with you, it's not an exhaustive study, but in what I looked at, I didn't see anything under 500,000. And 500,000 would be where the more stringent requirements would be kicking in, or the $1 million would be where the more stringent requirements would kick in. So imagine there's some basic requirements without being redundant that we've already talked about that, yes, they're going to have. And then at 500,000 or $1 million is where the more stringent requirements were kicking in. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. And again, I apologize about my internet getting a little bit.
No worries.
Hopefully it keeps up with us. Second question. And again, I know we've talked about sort of the 3 C's here in Ohio and ODOT. The other cities you've mentioned are, for the most part, southern cities. Cities either in sort of southeast-ish, sort of. I'm trying to not fail geography right now. I guess.
So there was Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. That's Midwesty. I did talk about North Carolina, Raleigh, and Charlotte. I did look at Jacksonville. So those are southern. Then Seattle, west. Chicago, whatever you want to call Chicago. Philadelphia. So I tried to get a bit of a geographic balance consistent with cities that are comparable.
Gotcha. So when I'm thinking about, and I promised I'm going to get to the question here in a second, but when I think about, Jacksonville, Raleigh, Charlotte, Kentucky, those are very different construction markets compared to what exists here. As far as again, the expectation of what those jobs look like. And I think Council President Hardin mentioned, earlier in his comments about, I think the one thing we're trying to do here is be holistic about, opening up opportunity for businesses that we can at the city, while also focusing on incentivizing, good jobs from our projects, right? We want these wages and benefits to be taken back to neighborhoods. And I guess the question when I think about, those cities, the Jacksonvilles, the Charlottes, the Lexingtons, the Raleighs of the world, those are typically markets in which we don't see, from the construction standpoint, significant healthcare or retirements offered to workers. And I'm curious from your research, for those cities, whether it's pre-qualification, which I think most of them don't have those standards, are they asking those questions about whether or not contractors are providing, healthcare and retirement and apprenticeship training like we are currently at the City of Columbus?
So I would say typically no. I would deviate on the apprenticeship training. There are some cities who are doing apprenticeship training because that's their way to bring up the pipeline. So there are some cities who are doing that. But to your questions regarding health insurance and pension, no. But I will note one city in particular that I did look at was the city of Chicago. And I would say that city of Chicago as a labor market would be comparable to Columbus. And they did have a limit of $500,000 or above before all the more stringent requirements kicked in. But as to the health insurance, no, there weren't a lot who asked that at all.
Okay, and just sort of follow up on that, sort of the more Midwestern one. So again, trying not to fail geography here. You know, the C's, ODOT, Indianapolis, are they making inquiries on that subject?
Indianapolis, no. And who else were you asking? The C's being Cleveland and
Yep.
Cincinnati? No, no,
Okay.
no. Cleveland and
Thank you.
Cincinnati do not ask at all. No.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Council member, if I may, one of the things that we were really focused in on as we looked at all of the work that went into the disparity study was how do we create an environment that gets folks to the table. We know all of the perceptions around government contracting, the red tape, and the nature of government contracting being somewhat difficult for contractors in general. And so part of our approach and focus in the pre-qualification is how do we begin to remove some of these barriers that at least gets folks into the game. And once we get them into the game, how are we creating capacity that enables that small contractor that's just starting out to build their capacity to offer those types of things? I'm at a real disadvantage as a small business if I'm asked to provide all of these things that my larger, better financed, larger firms are capable of. It's just not apples to apples. And so one of the intents behind the disparity study, and I know many of you have heard me say this before, but it would be a real shame if we don't look at this disparity study and figure out a way to really help and grow small businesses. It's not just about goals, and it's not just about hitting a specific number, but it really is about creating that growth mindset that enables all of us to participate and get into the game. And that's really what we were hoping to do here.
Yeah, thank you, Director Brown. And I think that comment is spot on. And I think one of the things we can certainly talk about as a city, and this is really important for those businesses that are small minorities sort of build up, is that because these projects are subject to Ohio's prevailing wage law, those benefits are built into the cost of labor, right? So that is expected within the wage rate right now. And I think to your point, Director, you're pointing out that there's additional cost to businesses to sort of turn on those benefits, and that's where I think our focus as a city, with partnership with other firms and joint ventures, really can exist for folks to gain access to those kinds of things, because the law sort of requires that dollar amount to be there anyways. And I think everyone would agree that we'd rather see that dollar amount going for healthcare and retirement and those kinds of things, because that's what helps build stable families. So I think that's where the real opportunity lies, since the wage rate has that baked in already. But I certainly appreciate that perspective.
Thank you, council members, and thank you, Ms. Rita and Director. Our final presentation is from council staff, and just to I won't say pre-qualified, just to preempt this, I will say that that there has been a lot of work and a lot of time, a lot of effort put into helping us come up with something that both, again, lifts up our values about how we protect people and their ability to work and take care of their families, but also, to Director Brown's point, that creates that ramp up, that runway, and that ability for our small and women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, to really to get to a place where they can hit those marks on their own. And so I just want to, before we go into the presentation, talk about where the direction we're heading before we get to community feedback. Just want to say that I'm appreciative of everybody coming to the table. I believe that it was done in and is being done in a fair and an open way. I think folks have really put it all on the table, and we are getting somewhere. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Zach Davidson to walk us through the council presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Council President. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if you would just let me know when you can see this so I know I'm not just talking to myself. All right, can you see that slide?
We can see it. Zach, you might want to hold your mic just a little closer.
Got it. Okay.
There we go.
Is this any better?
That's
Excellent.
100% better.
All right, thanks, Council President. So again, my name is Zach Davidson. I'm a legislative analyst for Columbus City Council. I'm going to be sharing some data about pre-qualification as well as some policy ideas. To start, also want to thank colleagues at City Council, Karina Johnson, Matt Erickson, Kevin McCain for their collaboration on this project, as well as Director Brown, Mr. Sean Faust, and other members from their respective departments. All right, so moving into our presentation, kind of before we dive into the data, it's worth contextualizing why we want to look at the pre-qualification process. And I think the Council President just hit on this. First, we want to bridge racial disparities that exist in the construction procurement kind of practices for the City of Columbus. Second, we want to support workers, provide good paying jobs with benefits to members of our community. And we want to try and advance clear and implementable policies that the public and our departments all understand. So in the data that I will walk through, it comes from a couple different sources. One, the Disparity Study from Mason Tillman, the city's list of pre-qualified businesses, city and state minority and women business enterprise lists, as well as the state's construction industry licensing board. A couple caveats, because it's fun to throw out pretty graphs, but sometimes there need to be some asterisks around those graphs. This is all based on historical data. So the Disparity Study was conducted between January of 2012 and December of 2015. So that's a 4-year sample size. There are a lot of contracts in here. However, the purchasing dynamics could look a little bit different over the past couple years. Second, the city has recently invested in some new software systems that will help track contracts and minority business utilization. Therefore, it'll give us some capacities moving forward that we just didn't have when conducting some of this analysis. We tried to pull data in certain ways and manipulate it, and the data just didn't exist or couldn't be utilized in that way. And then third, these numbers that we'll walk through, they don't show the reforms that the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and other departments have been working to implement as a part of the Disparity Study. And so it's possible we'll see improvements in these numbers without even changing anything within the pre-qualification code. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into the numbers. This is some information that Director Brown alluded to in her remarks. To break down this graph, it basically shows race and gender information on the y-axis. Rather than reading all the numbers, I kind of want to highlight just 3 important elements of this graph. First, African-American prime contractors face the greatest absolute gap between their availability in the market, how many folks there were out there doing this work, and their utilization by the city of any single categorical group. Second, the only group that was overutilized was businesses owned by white men. Third, and finally, all minority and women-owned businesses were underutilized versus their availability for prime contractors. So moving on to some similar data for subcontractors. It looks pretty similar. Again, African Americans, the most underutilized group based on absolute values. Businesses owned by white men still overutilized. The only small difference here is that Hispanic Americans are actually not underutilized when it comes to subcontracting. So this is all just stuff the Disparity Study brought out. So it's indicative. It says we have disparities. There's a problem in our construction procurement process, but it doesn't say that pre-qualification is the factor or the number one thing. So to keep moving through the data, this is based on an analysis that was done at the end of February, beginning of March. So I think it's a little bit different than what Sean quoted, but it's still got the same overall dynamic. What this graph shows is that there's basically not very much diversity among pre-qualified companies. When we ran the analysis a few months ago, there were 6 minority companies or women-owned companies out of 191. Sean said that as of now, the number is 8 versus 189. So the number used to be 3%, and now it's 4%. So again, the dynamic holds true. Next, if you look at, take a race and gender neutral look, as Sean and other folks have stated, the only subcontractors that have to pre-qualify are those that are licensed with the Ohio Construction Industry Licensing Board. There are thousands of OCILB licensed firms in Ohio. Council staff took a look at just the firms in Franklin County. There are over 500 of these businesses in Franklin County. 16 of them are pre-qualified based on our data from March. Again, the numbers might have changed a little bit, but it shows that the vast majority of firms choose not to work through the city's pre-qualification process. Director Brown hit a little bit of this in her remarks, but I think it is worth stating again. During the disparity study process, Mason Tillman conducted interviews with local business owners. Some business owners pointed to pre-qualification as a barrier. A minority male construction business owner said the pre-qualification process is the biggest barrier to minorities doing construction work with the city. A white male who is a business owner said one of the challenges to doing business with the city of Columbus is their pre-qualification process. The forms are very cumbersome. The rules are supposed to eliminate some of the documents you need when you submit as a prime contractor, but there are still many duplications. So I think it's fairly clear from this data, there is evidence that minority and women business owners are not getting pre-qualified, and that some individuals think that the process can be burdensome. So to rather than problematizing the issue to no end, I'll go ahead and move in to some potential policy remedies. So breaking these down into kind of 5 basic categories, there's awareness and supporting businesses through this process. There is simplifying the process, opening up small contracts. We can also look at how requirements work on very large contracts, and then thinking about regular review periods. These are not mutually exclusive pillars. You could implement all of these to improve the city's pre-qualification process. So the first is about awareness and business support. So hearing kind of rumblings about the problems that minority and women-owned businesses were having getting through this process. $100,000 was earmarked in the 2021 operating budget to help businesses work through that process. These dollars could be used to sponsor outreach events with diverse contractors, pay an external firm to help educate business owners on opportunities for contracting with the business, with the city, excuse me. And then I think one thing that came through in stakeholder conversations when we were talking to small contractors is, I think to Director Brown's point earlier, smaller companies maybe just don't have the administrative staff to work through dozens and dozens of pages worth of paperwork. And so the city can utilize some operating dollars to help support businesses and provide them a little bit of assistance during that process. So the second pillar is just about making the process more simple. There are kind of 2 key questions that dictate how complicated an application process like this is. First, what information is required as a part of the pre-qualification process? And then how often do I have to fill out all this paperwork? When it comes to what information is needed, council could remove some elements of the pre-qualification list just so that it takes less time to complete. Currently, the form itself is about a 30 some odd page a fillable PDF. It might make a big difference for small companies if there's simply a different form that's slightly more user-friendly, that isn't so intimidating. The other important element here is that firms have to do this practice every single year. So they fill out the same information every year. One change that could be made there is that this could become an every other year requirement. And then in between years, firms could submit an affidavit stating that their status from the previous year has not changed, rather than having to fill out the entire set of paperwork again. Third, and I think this kind of gets into the meat of some of the previous conversation, opening up small contracts. Council staff heard from a handful of small firms that some of the requirements for pre-qualification are simply beyond their reach as kind of small growing businesses. So a potential remedy could be opening up contracts under $500,000. The code could be written so that construction pre-qualification would only be required for projects with a total value over 500,000. For context of kind of where this falls, what does that mean in terms of how many contracts? That's about the 50th percentile in terms of total construction contracts. So if you want to be really precise, the exact median contract value is $570,000 basically. So this would be a little less than half of the contracts that would be opened up. Now it's important to say that means that the number of contracts, not the total dollar amount. If you splice it by total dollar amount, it takes a lot of $100,000 projects to add up to a $25 million project. But in terms of individual contracts, 500,000 is close to the 50th percentile. And then next, thinking about large contract requirements, we know it's a council priority to provide good jobs with good benefits. Pre-qualification currently requires that firms fulfill 3 of 5 criteria. They're providing healthcare benefits, retirement benefits, quality training, being a local business in the city, or having a local workforce, as that's defined. Council staff has urged that healthcare, retirement, quality training are particularly important for council members and for a lot of partners and residents in Columbus. So council could advance policy that requires some or all firms working on large contracts to meet what I'll call sort of the benefit policies: healthcare, retirement, quality training. To potentially avoid some of the cumbersome or redundant forms, verification could be conducted by the primes on these projects. They could submit an affidavit stating that they and potentially their subcontractors are in compliance with these rules. Furthermore, you could make exceptions for very small companies participating on large contracts, so it's not an undue burden. And then finally, regular policy review. This is really just a kind of good government standard that's council has begun writing into various policies. I know the Community Reinvestment Area Housing Code is a prime example where council comes back to that code every 3 years to look at it. We could come back to this code every 2 or 3 years, looking at key metrics to ensure that we're getting what we need out of the pre-qualification code in terms of diverse utilization rates, in terms of new pre-qualified businesses. And with those new software systems that I mentioned earlier, we'll be able to really splice the data to look at how these policies are affecting different companies at different levels potentially. So with these 5 pillars, could potentially help us take some good steps in the right direction to give small businesses a shot at city contracts, give them a seat at the table to steal some of Director Brown's language, while at the same time encouraging more firms to provide good benefits to the residents. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
I'm going to open up to my colleagues for questions.
After you, Council President or Councilmember Barrett.
Actually don't have any questions, believe it or not, but I would like to take this opportunity to just echo Council President Hardin's remarks earlier and just showing our appreciation for the work that has been done to get us to this point. I'm excited to kind of dig a little deeper into these 5 initiatives / proposals, but I appreciate the work that's been done thus far.
The only sort of clarifying question I want to ask Zach, and I know you know the answer to this because we've talked about it together, but just for the purpose of the discussion. But for those contractors that are licensed through the Ohio Industry Construction Licensing Board, so those are firms that would need to be pre-qualified under the current standard in order to do business with the city. I know we had difficulty determining how many of them qualify as an EDGE or MBE or a small firm. Can you just talk for a moment, like why that's sort of difficult for us to parse out? Because I think to your point, there's a significant chunk of those contractors, for whatever reason, are not choosing to do business with the city, whether that's pre-qualification or something else. And that lends to the next question from a diversity standpoint of how many of those businesses that are choosing to not work with us are, minority or small business, et cetera. I know we had challenges, as you talked about, with the data of trying to figure out what that is. And because those firms are ones that under the current standard would need to be pre-qualified, I think it's helpful for us just to sort of point that out.
Yeah, absolutely, Councilmember. So the OCILB data is a race and gender neutral database. So they basically don't ask the question. They don't ask businesses about majority ownership and categorize them that way. We did some sort of ad hoc legwork to basically cross-pollinate our lists. So to take the OCILB and compare it to the pre-qual list, to take the state EDGE and say, are there any on state EDGE that for some reason haven't gone through the process with the city? And so because of those separate databases and because of some of the lack of kind of record keeping on various state agencies' part, it's hard to make some of those comparisons. But hopefully for city-related business, as the new software systems are set up, we'll be able to have some better information and do a kind of more rigorous modeling around some of those questions.
Thanks, Zach. And under that sort of, again, sort of preliminary research, again, we saw, the vast majority of those contractors not being identified in that state database or through the city. Again, those firms may qualify as such, but they may have not asked for that state designation or city designation. So that's one of the things we ran into. If I remember correctly, and Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a number of those that were registered with the state that were in fact pre-qualified with the city. Am I remember that correctly?
Yeah, there are a handful that went through that process, and I think that it's a worthy kind of point to bring up in terms of what exactly is the causal mechanism behind why businesses may not want to work with the city, and part of it may just be due to a tight private construction labor market where they don't have to fill out the same paperwork to work on a private contract versus a public contract. So those are kind of other dynamics at play as well.
Yeah, and someone who's spent a little bit of time around the industry, I think it's helpful for us to step back and acknowledge that there is disparities that just exist within the industry as constructed, whether it's public or private markets. And that's something that, as a city, I think the whole point of this discussion here tonight is to see what is our role in this sort of moving forward. And some of those market forces we can control with do some help on our side, but there's also market forces that are certainly outside of the City of Columbus projects. When you look across the Central Ohio region, you're seeing billions of dollars worth of construction spending that far exceeds what we have, which again, unfortunately, may sort of perpetuate the existing inequities that already exist within that market. So just I think important part of the discussion as we try to parse that out as the city and sort of what our role is.
Thank you, Councilmember. Hey, Zach, a question. I think it's on your point 5 or the 5th category around metrics. To your point, one of the commitments that we will make and put into this legislation is a look back period or a review period to say, we have made changes. What has this helped? When we talk to both minority contractors and folks in labor and folks who care about this issue, can you remind me some of the things they want us to track? Like how do we hold ourselves accountable to say this is working or it's not? This went too far or it didn't go far enough. How do we do this and maybe even talk about how far out we said we would do a official look back or check-in?
Yeah, it's a great question, Council President. I think so. Two primary pieces that have been identified in kind of stakeholder conversations. One, diverse business utilization. Are we beginning to close those numbers in the construction industry when we look at primes and subcontractors? The second is, are we getting more diverse businesses pre-qualified? Are they able to maybe take advantage of some lower level contracts that maybe fall under the pre-qualification threshold, then grow their revenue stream and then get pre-qualified, start going after even bigger contracts? So I think the diversity and the makeup of the companies on the pre-qualification list is important. Another element, which I think I'm probably getting out a little bit over my skis right now, but I know that Council Member Dorans has brought this up, and some external partners have brought up, is thinking also about the diversity of kind of the labor force. So not only maybe are you a MBE company, but also 60% of your workers are from that neighborhood, or are people of color, or maybe you have a substantial amount of women on your construction site, et cetera. Those are some other pieces that could be tracked. That last piece does not have sort of built-in software infrastructure, to my knowledge, so that might need to be something else that Council pursues. But I know that's another metric that's been brought up in discussion by stakeholders.
Do we say how long out we would do that review?
2 to 3 years is pretty standard.
Okay, I would like to make sure that is ordained so that we have that commitment to the entire community, that we will check ourselves.
Yep.
I do have
Please.
Thank you. Zach, I'm wondering if you could elaborate just a little bit, or maybe this is just an opportunity to kind of give a better idea of what we mean when we talk about $100,000 for vendor outreach and support. A little over a month ago, Councilmember Remy and I attended an event that was in collaboration with the, the name is escaping me right now, but it's all in support of the new hospital, the new wing that's being built on OSU's campus. And the intentional support, that engagement that was done in order to ensure that MBE and the WBE community was aware of the extent of potential opportunities to engage, to bid, to get prime and, well, not prime, but sub-prime work with this project. And I thought that they did a really phenomenal job in laying all of that information out and having other agencies available to help get folks certified, understand what the certifying process even looks like. Really broke it down. So do we have an idea of what our engagement might look like? And Director Brown, perhaps you could speak a little bit more eloquently than I can about that entire program and process that OSU in partnership with it's the African American Male Wellness Walk umbrella organization. I can't think of the name right now.
National Center for Urban Solutions.
Yes, thank you so much.
It was like Jeopardy. You got it. I was so close.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. But is that what we're talking about when we're talking about marketing and outreach on certain projects?
Director Brown, if you want to start on the OSU piece, and then I can talk about some of the earmarked dollars.
Sure. So I'm not involved in the OSU project, so I'll speak about outreach and engagement more broadly. And so what we would do and what we do in the city and are really working in collaboration with our departments to do more of is to really understand the projects that are being let and the needs that they have around contracting, breaking it down into its smallest components. identifying who are our certified minority and women businesses in those spaces, also identifying where we might have gaps, and then beginning to source those MWBEs to ensure that we have a solid bench of ready, willing, and able businesses who can support those projects. So that outreach and engagement would take a number of forms. It could be through our email blast. It could be the monthly procurement fairs that we do with the Ohio MBE Plan Room. It could also be in partnership with many of our other organizations such as WSBA, and I see we have Mary McCarthy on the line. Any number of things. I think when we talk about the engagement of minority and women businesses, it really does take that village, and it takes our partnership across many supporting organizations as well as private and public sector to ensure that we're getting that information out. But more importantly, that we're also building that capacity for those businesses to be able to compete. It's one thing to say we've given you the information, but have we given you the tools, and have we eliminated the barriers to get you to the table?
And you're absolutely correct, Director Brown. You know, the work around equity, it must be one that is done with intention. And so if we're not intentional about how we engage, none of what we're talking about today will make a bit of a difference for our WBEs and MBEs. So thank you.
Yeah, that was far better than I could state it. On the other sort of element of regarding what those earmark funds could be used for, another element that we've heard about is thinking about sort of user-end design around how pre-qualification works. Oftentimes, legislative bodies, not Columbus City Council, but other legislative bodies, will set up a policy, a department will be asked to implement it, and there won't be a sort of facilitated process where the actual users of the process and the department heads sit down together and really think about, like, what's the best way to do this? Which pieces do I need documentation on, where I need to go procure it from another government agency, or which areas could be a yes or no checkbox? Is it a is it a fillable PDF? Is it an online form? Can I save my progress? Like, down to that level of granularity, some of those earmarked funds could be used to help with that, in addition to bolstering the outreach that many of our departments complete.
That's great. Thank you, Zach.
All right, I think that we have come to our public testimony portion of the agenda. We have 4 speakers signed up to speak with us this evening. Our first speaker to come before council is Mr. Dorsey Hager. Mr. Dorsey, welcome to council. Just a reminder, we have 3 minutes.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir. Welcome to council.
All right, thank you, President Hardin. Council President Hardin, other members of City Council, and also staff, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Dorsey Hager. I'm the Executive Secretary Treasurer of the Columbus and Central Ohio Building Construction Trades Council. The Columbus Building Trades represents 18,000 highly skilled tradesmen and women in Columbus and Central Ohio. The Columbus Building Trades appreciates the important work that you are doing in our community to ensure that economic opportunities are widely distributed and available to all working people. For neighborhoods and residents to thrive, we need stable employment, good pay, high quality health insurance, and retirement benefits for all working people in our city, regardless of race, color, gender, national origin, sexual orientation, disability, age, or veteran status. Through pioneering pre-apprenticeship programs like Building Futures, Build Back Better Together, and the successful Linden Community Recreation Center Community Benefits Agreement, among other initiatives, the Columbus Building Trades and its affiliated trade unions have demonstrated a strong commitment to working with our community partners to knock down barriers and open doors for all Central Ohio workers, with a particular emphasis on racial minorities and women. Based on the successful Earn to Learn model, our registered apprenticeship programs provide working people, regardless of race or gender, with a pathway to the middle class, unobstructed by crippling student loan debt or the need to work multiple jobs to put food on the table. Indeed, all of our female and racial minority construction apprentices in the state of Ohio, 95% and 84% respectively, are in registered apprenticeship programs affiliated with the building trades unions. A core mission of the Columbus Building Trades is to protect high-quality construction standards in our city and the health and well-being of all construction workers. I know you share our mission. A strong, responsible contracting policy is fundamental to putting our shared vision into practice. In every area of the state, large cities, small cities, urban counties, and statewide agencies like Akron, Athens, Chillicothe, Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, Lorain, Oregon, Toledo, Cuyahoga County, Franklin County, Lorain County, Lucas County, Montgomery County, Summit County, and the Ohio Department of Transportation all have adopted responsible contracting policies to ensure public authorities get the best value for the taxpayers. The Columbus Building Trades is an advocate for responsible contracting policies that ensure contractors have a track record of completing quality jobs while providing employees with fair wages, good benefits, and safe working conditions. By including responsible contracting criteria in bid specifications, project owners clearly state that quality standards, in addition to the lowest price, will be considered as part of the selection process. This prevents a simply race to the bottom type of contracting, which is all too familiar in the construction industry and puts working families last. Quality standards may include proper experience and safety training, drug and alcohol-free workplaces, registered apprenticeship, references for contractors and proof of financial stability, compliance with applicable laws and regulations, proper licensing, insurance, and bonding, and a focus on workplace accident and illness rates, among other factors. Through these procedures, bidders know the project owner or governing entity is dedicated to employing competent, qualified construction firms and skilled craftspeople who are treated with dignity and respect on the job. Receiving bids from experienced, responsible contractors will reduce or eliminate delays and help bring projects in on budget while increasing transparency. As a result, elected officials can make better informed decisions on public improvement projects, resulting in a higher quality product for taxpayers, the community, and working families, and depend on good wages and benefits that come from these projects. Any changes affecting the current training, health insurance, and pension retirement benefit requires set forth in CC 329 must be carefully considered. The current quality training requirements are consistent with best safety practices and support high quality construction work. Health insurance and pension retirement benefit requirements ensure skilled craftspeople have access to affordable medical care when they need it, and employer contributions to retirement worthy of a person who helped make the buildings and infrastructure that will support generations of Columbus residents and businesses. As City Council considers changes to the Columbus Fair contracting policy, the Columbus Building Trades urges you to continue to lead when it comes to protecting the interest of all construction workers and high-quality construction standards in our city. We understand the desire and community benefit of a more diverse contracting base for contracts. That said, I ask that Council considers the impact of any changes that CC 329 will have on workers. Contractors that provide health care, retirement, and training help build a stronger Columbus and a stronger community and improve the lives of working people. These workers carry those wages and benefits back with them to neighborhoods across this city and help increase financial stability for countless families. Again, we understand the intention of increasing the participation of small minority businesses on city construction projects, but workers are equally as important in this discussion. As changes to CC 329 are considered, we believe it is paramount for the city to approach reforms with the goal of keeping strong, responsible contractor policy that is consistent with protecting high-quality construction standards, sound management of taxpayer dollars, building partnerships with business owners, and a commitment to the economic well-being of skilled craftspeople, including minority and female construction workers who deserve and need good pay, quality benefits, and safe working conditions. As always, I look forward to working with you on our common goals and vision for the city of Columbus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dorsey Hager. I just want to say thank you for being at the table for this conversation, for your continued and ongoing work and fight to protect the ability for working class people to take care of themselves and their families. And thank you for your support along the way of this conversation. I think we do share the similar values as we look to increase the number of minority owned firms and women-owned firms that can pre-qualify without any support, and hopefully this work, these changes will help get us there. Are there any questions or comments from Mr. Hager from my colleagues? All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Hager. The next person to come before council is Kelly Harrop. Kelly, welcome to council.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Yes, okay. City Council President Hardin, council members Favor and Dorans, and staff. My name is Kelly Harrop, and I am the Communications and Outreach Director for the Columbus and Central Ohio Building Trades and Construction Council. In my role as Communications Director, I've had the unique opportunity to work with Building Futures, the award-winning nonprofit pre-apprenticeship program. The goal of the program is to help place underemployed and unemployed members of our community onto a direct path to the middle class. Today, I would like to speak about how pre-qualification and fair contracting standards are integral to our program's success. Building Futures is a 12-week program administered by the Columbus Building and Construction Trades Council in partnership with the Franklin County Commissioners and Columbus Urban League. The program was created not only to promote good-paying careers, but also to help ensure our construction workforce looks like the community in which they are working. Students of the program receive practical skills in such as classroom training, tools, protective equipment, as well as a $250 a week stipend and full wraparound services. Upon completion of the program, graduates emerge ready for job placement and admittance into a registered apprenticeship program. Recently, our program hit a substantial landmark as we graduated and placed our 100th student on the path to the middle class. Just as important as to who works on public construction projects is how they are treated. We believe in Building Futures students and graduates agree that every person, no matter who they are or what their background, has a right to good wages and benefits. Our graduates would not have the opportunities for economic advancement they do to come to expect without pre-qualification requirements and other public policies that promote apprenticeship programs, high-quality healthcare, and the ability to retire with dignity and security. As they say, a rising tide lifts all boats, and providing Building Futures students graduates who will eventually become our workers and contractors with the support they need that allow them and their family members to thrive and give back to their community. By guaranteeing that any changes to pre-qualification standards are fair and fair contracting policies directly benefit tradespeople on the job sites, we can strengthen our neighborhoods and our cities. Building Futures graduates recognize the immense opportunity they are provided upon admittance into the program. Among other things, entry into the skill trade reduces gender and racial wealth gaps. They are encouraged to enter the construction workforce with the same optimism and enthusiasm they demonstrate in class. They want to work in a safe workplace and a stable occupation that will sustain them for years to come. That is what it takes to build generational wealth, reduce income inequality, and strengthen our most vulnerable neighborhoods. Like the members of Columbus City Council, we support the growth and diversification of the construction industries, as do the Building Futures students and graduates. By maintaining pre-qualification standards that promote apprenticeship, high-quality healthcare, and the ability to retire with dignity, and by helping contractors achieve fair contracting standards, the City of Columbus guarantees that jobs in the construction industry and public construction projects will continue to provide a pathway for the middle class for thousands of residents, including those who have been left behind for far too long. We look forward to working with you on what we know are our shared goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Harrop. Are there any questions from my colleagues or Ms. Harrop? I would only say that this council has a strong commitment to Building Futures. We do. I think we were all out at a ceremony in the last month or so and got to see the great diversity that a program like Building Futures is providing to our community. So just keep up the good work. Thank you so much. The next speaker to come before council is Ms. Jacqueline Neal. Is Ms. Neal with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Welcome back to council.
Wonderful. Good evening. Thank you for having me back, Council President Hardin, Director Brown, City Council members, and Ms. Rita. My name is Jacqueline Neal. I'm President and CEO of the Ohio Minority Supplier Development Council. I'd like to focus my comments on suggestions this evening to ensure that solutions will be embraced by those in positions to make decisions regarding minority contractors. I hope they'll be helpful. The first three suggestions are from a Minority Business Development Agency study entitled Contracting Barriers and Factors Affecting Minority Business Enterprises, a review of existing disparity studies prepared December 2016. The first suggestion is that agencies can generate disparity study fact sheets and distribute them to buyers and office staff. This allows staff to see exactly what issues the disparity study identified with respect to discrimination and should advance the discussion towards finding solutions. An ongoing education process could focus on understanding specific problems and using teamwork to solve them. It could also encourage buy-in across the organization by starting with a thorough understanding of the problem. The bottom line is that process improvement works best by involving those who have contributed to the problem and developing the solution. The second suggestion is that contractors who don't win a bid require objective and accurate feedback to improve subsequent bidding opportunities. Although not cited as a major barrier, multiple minority business owners reported that they lack feedback on failed proposals. Because most proposals contain evaluation criteria in the performance work statement, government agencies should provide the information on firm and proposal ratings to the contractors. Contractors who did not win will work to correct their mistakes in the next proposal to increase their chances of winning. And the third suggestion is a study that examines the economic impact of discrimination in public contracting could help quantify lost revenue and the impact on communities. This study could help the City of Columbus to create a centralized data system going forward where local data flows in, collecting anecdotal information, incident reports, payment speed, etc. The data would be publicly available and would permit the City of Columbus to proactively develop and run well-informed initiatives to alleviate discriminatory behavior that causes disparities in public contracting. That's from the study. Just one more idea to consider. I really like the reference in the policy brief to bringing the city's construction bidding process into the 21st century. As you're aware, lack of access to working capital has been proven to be a barrier for MBEs, so why not consider offering faster payments? As an example, Walmart and Sam's Clubs are offering faster payments and new financing opportunities to assist diverse suppliers in overcoming access to capital challenges. Through a partnership with the financial technology company, Walmart has expanded its early payment program, which aims to increase suppliers' ability to gain access to working capital. Perhaps this is an opportunity for a partnership with the Black-owned bank to develop creative solutions. The City of Philadelphia has also launched a new vendor tool, which will allow the city to reduce the time it takes to pay vendors. These are just some of the ways that might ensure that MBEs are at the table for construction opportunities. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Jacqueline. I was wondering if Director Brown could speak to our new data system and if it would speak to some of the things that Ms. Jacqueline Neal spoke to in terms of data tracking and its ability to be absorbed by the public.
Sure. So the City of Columbus recently purchased or entered into contract with B2G Now to begin that process of creating a database that helps us to better manage and become more proactive, as Jackie just recently alluded to. So that system will enable us to do a number of key things. One of them will be to take our current certification process and take that all online. Your online application is done, it's processed online, and we're able to turn those certifications in record time. Tia, who's a one-woman shop, does a very good job as it is, but it's going to enable her to create some efficiencies in her process. It also allows us the opportunity to create an online searchable database, which we don't have today, that enables that department project manager or a community member who's looking for a vendor that provides roofing services or what have you to search that database for small, local, minority, and women-owned businesses. Another thing that it does is it enables us to better manage and track our spending. Where is it going? Is it going to prime contractors at a rate that is that exceeds the availability of our minority women businesses? Are we spending dollars more outside of Franklin County than we are inside of Franklin County? We really have a good opportunity to get our hands on the data. It also enables us to manage our outreach. So to Jackie's point, it also gives us an opportunity to take a look at, you know, are we reaching minority businesses in a timely fashion with our contracting opportunities? Are they engaging on our RFPs? If not, it gives us a data point to begin to ask the questions, why not? And then are they ultimately successful? One of the things that's happening in the disparity study that I didn't mention, but I think is a very important point, is that we've also standardized the debriefing process for all of our vendors. So in the event that any vendor is unsuccessful in winning a bid or RFP, there's a standard for how we debrief them and provide them information that helps them to be more successful in the future. So there are a number of things that we are doing that will enable us to have better tracking of our data. I will mention, and I think you wanted me to go here, we currently have some of that data online today. And so while we're getting better at doing that, but right today our community can go to columbus.gov/diversity and take a look at our current dashboard, both for our workforce diversity as well as for our supplier spend.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Director. Our last speaker to come before council is Carrie Martin.
Thank you, Councilman Hardin and Shayla Favor, Councilwoman and staff. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Kari Martin, and I'm with Central Contractors and Redevelopment. I am a licensed general contractor with the state of Ohio. Now, I'll tell you that my great-grandmother was Ida Elma Taylor, and she was one of the founders of the Ohio Realtors, or the Columbus Realtors Association. And, you know, she fought against a lot of the redlining. And as I have grew in my career, I am starting to see that there are still barriers that have been put in place. And it saddens me. It really saddens me. I believe that if more contracts were to be rewarded to minority contractors, that the outcome would be that the general contractor has the opportunity to create more jobs, which will ultimately assist with other disadvantages that occur when there is a lack of opportunity in the community. I believe that nepotism is part of the main issue here. I believe that if we took a step and did our due diligence and kind of controlled how often some of the larger construction companies were awarded jobs over some of the smaller construction companies, then it would be more opportunity created. I also think that accessibility for the pre-qualification bid application is also an issue. I seen when I went to the website that to apply, you have to go into another internal city website, and you cannot drop or mail that application in. So I believe that the application should be more accessible. You have a lot of contractors that are skilled tradesmen, but they're not tech savvy. They're contractors. So without profit and gain, they can't afford the overhead to hire project managers or project administrators, you know, and they're not skilled at submitting requests for the request for qualifications. So, I mean, I think that it's just a systematic issue. And that concludes my comment. Thank you very much.
No, I appreciate those comments. I think they were all well stated and well taken. We will take those to note. One about the ease. I think Zach kind of spoke to that in terms of fixes for us to focus in on. But also to your larger point, just around the more minority and women-owned contractors that we're able to support, the more folks from the community that look like them that are able to get those good jobs that we all want. So I appreciate you and look forward to engaging and working with you in the future. Before I give closing comments, I just want to offer it up to Director and see if she has any closing comments before I go to council members, and then I'll close this out.
I wasn't expecting that.
Mhm.
You know, I think for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and the investment that we have put forth with the Disparity Study and the engagement with the community really leads us back to a fundamental question of how inclusive our contracting will be and how we will begin to raise up the opportunities for our small and minority and women-owned businesses to participate at a different level. I saw a T-shirt not long ago. We can't look at our contracting as a pie, that if a percentage of that is awarded to minority and women businesses, that somehow others lose. It's not, you know, again, it's not winners and losers in this particular perspective. In my opinion, and I think the Disparity Study tried to show, is that we all stand to gain when we have an inclusive process that brings all parties to the table. And so as council begins to consider changes to pre-qualification, again, I would like to reiterate that this is a great opportunity and a turning point for our city to really make its mark in terms of what type of city we will be with respect to engaging all citizens in our process and affording them the opportunity toward economic prosperity for all of us. We all stand to gain, and we either win together or we lose together. And I really will implore City Council to really take a hard and fast look at this and ensure that we are doing the right things by those marginalized communities who have suffered through our contracting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Director, and thank you for your leadership and partnership on these efforts. Councilmember Favor.
I just want to thank everyone who has helped to get us to this point. You know, the issues that we're tackling as a legislative body, as citizens in this country, this is not easy work, but it's worthwhile work. It absolutely requires us to be engaging with our residents on a consistent basis, us listening and responding accordingly. And I think that this is a step in the right direction. We have a lot of work to do. Obviously, this is not going to resolve all of our problems, but this is absolutely the next step that I believe that we should take as a city if we're truly committed to this work around equity, specifically as it relates to our construction industry. Columbus is growing rapidly and has been for quite some time. And we want to ensure that all of our residents have an opportunity to be a part of that growth. So thank you all for the work that you've done to get us to this point.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Dorrance.
Thank you, Council President Hardin. I mean, I think it would be, if we try to quantify the hours that council staff and the administration has already put into this, we would certainly be in the hundreds, if not thousands of hours of hard work, because this is an incredibly complex issue. And I think folks here tonight have talked directly to that issue of the balance between, again, promoting small minority and women-owned businesses and making sure that we're doing what we can from a leadership perspective of encouraging good benefits and wages to be out in our community. Looking forward to continuing this discussion and hopefully landing in a policy that provides support for both of those goals. And I genuinely believe we've got the right people around the table right now to come to that conclusion, and certainly appreciate people putting their ability and expertise together to figure this out. to Councilwoman Favors' point, we are focused on equity, and that equity is both racial and economic in our city. And those are tightly linked if we want to make sure that we really are the opportunity city that we'd like to think of ourselves as. So again, just want to say thank you to everyone who's put the incredible amount of work where we're at right now and where we're going to be here, hopefully the next few weeks as we formalize legislation at council.
Thank you, Councilmember Dorns. I just want to echo all the appreciation to everyone's team. Councilmember Dorns is right. There have been hundreds of hours of work put into this process, and it is extremely complex. And so I appreciate folks' time and their effort and their commitment to Columbus and getting and being better, acknowledging when we can be better. And I think this is a space where we can be better. We've covered a lot, so specifically to Sean Fouts, to Bianca Bell, to Deputy Director Bond, who had a family event and come up at the last minute, couldn't be with us, to the ODI team, Director Brown and Miss Rita, and then to Council's team, Zach Davidson, and all the counts to Karina, to Councilmember Dorn's staff, oh my gosh, Kevin, don't tell Kevin I did that. A lot of hard work has been put into this. We covered a lot of material this evening. For the folks who want to review the slides again, a full video will be posted on the City of Columbus's YouTube page. Council will continue engaging with the community and interested partners over the next few weeks. We will advance this legislation in the month of July ahead of our legislative break. So if folks are watching at home have questions, or want to engage or have additional ideas, you saw the 5 pillars in which we want to address, this is the time to do so. Please share it widely through all of our communities because there's been a lot of work done. I wish I had a sports analogy to show how close we are. But what I will make this commitment, we're going to do it and we're going to get this done. But we would love to have your feedback to make sure that we are in the right place. You can reach out to me at sghardin@columbus.gov or call my office at 614-645-2726. With that, I'll adjourn this hearing. Have a great evening, everyone, and happy 4th of July.